Well, hello again. Welcome back to Coup de Gras 2, Electric Luau, Day 2. We are here with the Solarpunk Farmer, ready for their panel on regenerative agriculture. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Oh, wonderful. I'm absolutely excited that we could have you here today, and I will let you take it away.
All right. I'm just posting these links to my Facebook so that people can see it. So just give me a moment, please. Trying not to make this take too long. Streaming. Okay. Sounds good. This looks good now. All right. So I think we're good. Let me share my screen. Share screen. Okay. All right. Inception. Let's not do that. Okay. All right. Can you all see and hear me all right? Just want to make sure we look good. We'll get started in a moment. This is going to be a very interesting talk. I'm very excited for this. So I'm going to just get my notes up right here because this is going to be, we're going to be talking about a lot in this talk, and it's going to be a lot of material, a lot of ground to cover, but I'm really excited. This is a really interesting topic, and I've been wanting to turn a lot of anarchists on to the subject of regenerative agriculture and how it's really applicable to the anarchist program and movement. So this presentation is called Radical Agriculture, named after Bookchin's work towards an anarchist land ethic through regenerative farming. So here are the, this is actually, I skipped a slide, who I am. So I'm just your local friendly Solarpunk YouTuber, and I make content about gardening. I talk about aquaponics. I talk about regenerative agriculture. I talk about permaculture and various other topics. We'll be doing more content like this on my channel where I talk about political environmental philosophy as it applies to the solarpunk movement and to agriculture in general in the future. So make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel so you can see future content. I've been putting out more content lately. So yeah, so I'm also an urban agriculture and aquaponics practitioner in the Los Angeles area. I've been involved in urban agriculture for about 7 years now, and aquaponics for 4 years. So I'm pretty seasoned, pretty spicy. And I've done most of the work that I've done in local food desert communities. That is, communities that struggle with accessing fresh, healthy food due to a lack of supermarkets, difficulty with transportation, and just poverty in general. And I've also been studying environmental philosophy and politics for quite a while, both within and outside of an academic setting. So let's talk a little bit about the objectives of this presentation. So the first thing that I want to do is formulate an anarchist critique of the relationship our modern society has to nature. Why is the relationship that our society have towards nature hierarchical, authoritarian, and unjust? And how did this relationship develop in terms of its historical lineage? Then I want to propose an alternative. I want to formulate an anarchist environmental ethic that applies to relations between humans and terrestrial ecosystems. So basically, how can we relate to the natural world in an anarchist way, and then how can we conduct ourselves along those lines so that we don't act in an authoritarian and oppressive way towards other life forms on this planet and ecosystems in general? Then I want to demonstrate the application of this ethic. I want to show how this ethic can be applied within the realm of agriculture by anyone who can grow food. So this presentation ultimately is going to be about growing food in an anarchist way, and it's a very exciting topic. And you know, I don't oftentimes see food production discussed either within the anarchist movement or within the left in general. I know some of you are going to be left wing, some of you are going to be more right wing, but I'm also a part of the left, and you know, the left doesn't really talk about it that much either. So, but it's a very important topic because ultimately, if you have a growing movement, you're going to need to be able to grow foods to sustain it, and we need to start talking about, like, you know, how we can achieve food sovereignty within our movement, and how we can begin building the basis for a new society. And food production is a very important part of it. Food is the basis of our civilization, and so we're going to need to produce food in a way that is in line with our values. So I wanted to first talk a little bit about the prime directive of anarchism, which y'all should be familiar with. It's basically the idea that all hierarchical institutions should be subject to critique, and if they cannot justify themselves, then they should be abolished. And so I wanted to put this Noam Chomsky quote here, but that is what I've always understood to be the essence of anarchism: the conviction that the burden of proof must be placed on authority, and that it should be dismantled if that burden cannot be met. So that's pretty much the philosophical basis of anarchism throughout much of its history. And this is where we're going to take our critique. This is going to be the starting point for the critique I'm going to present of our relationship with the natural world and our industrial food system throughout the course of this presentation. So I believe that the anarchist critique should be extended to environmental issues. And normally this critique is applied to patriarchy, to racism, to capitalism, to homophobia, to transphobia, to imperialism. But I think we should extend this critique because ultimately the way that we behave towards each other is going to be reflected in the way that we treat the environment. And this is something that political philosopher Murray Bookchin really understood, and that many indigenous people have understood throughout the course of history, and they constructed their relationships with each other around, you know, the way that they've been relating to the natural world. Social ecology is a revolutionary social theory that proposes the domination of nature by humans is a product of the domination of humans by humans. So the hierarchical power structures that exist within our society throughout the course of history have been reproduced in the way that we interact with the other life forms and with the environment. Therefore, I believe that we should extend the anarchist critique to environmental issues. So I just want to talk a little bit about Bookchin's social ecology. And Bookchin said, what defines social ecology is its recognition that the often overlooked fact that nearly all our present ecological problems arise from deep-seated social problems. Conversely, our present ecological problems cannot be clearly understood, much less resolved, without resolutely dealing with problems within society. Given this, you know, it's very clear that if we apply an ecological critique to anarchism and anarchist thought, that could be very powerful, and then that could really dig deep into the root causes of all these ecological problems that we're facing today. So Bookchin also said that in the medieval world, again, one finds the natural world organized hierarchically, just as medieval society was organized hierarchically. One finds there a king of the beasts because one lives amidst kings, and one finds lowly ants because one lives in a social world built around the labor of lowly serfs. So very relevant. And then this relation has existed throughout history. Bookchin also wrote about how this relation was present in ancient Greek society, how there was a distinction between wild and tamed nature within Greek society. This arose from social relations within Greek society, and also in indigenous society. Bookchin spoke of the Algonquins, who had a very egalitarian society and organized in clans, and their view of the natural world was reflected in that. They saw the beavers as organizing clans and the other animals organizing clans. So we project the way that our views of the social world onto nature, and that our social views, that projection really stems from a concept called reification that was originally introduced by the Marxists. And I'm sure, some of you may not be fond of Marxism, but I think that there are some things we can take from it that have a really good critical edge we could apply to anarchism, and one of them is this concept of reification. Marxist writer Gaho Petrovic wrote that the act or the result of the act of that reification is the act or result of the act of transforming human properties, relations, and actions into properties, relations, and actions of man-produced things which have become independent and which are imagined as originally independent of man and govern his life. Also, transformation of human beings into thing-like beings which do not behave in a human way, but according to the laws of the thing world. Reification is a special case of alienation, its most radical and widespread form characteristic of modern capitalist society. And this notion of reification was extended to our relations with nature by writer and professor John Bellamy Foster, who essentially said that the reification of nature is taking social relationships or relations between people and nature and turning them into relations between things. That way, nature has been transformed into an object within a matrix of the capitalist relations of production. And as anarchists, we could say the hierarchical relations that are present within our society. We project these things onto nature and take them to be a given. So what essentially this means is that nature has been transformed from an array of subjects that is living creatures with a subjective experience and turned into an object that is separate from humans, because nature really includes humans. We are a product of nature. We are a product of millions of years of evolution, and all of these traits that we have that have allowed us to construct an advanced civilization we acquired through evolution by natural selection. So we really are a part of nature, and the way that we view nature, the dominant ideological social construction of nature views us as separate from nature. So nature has been reified. And this reification in Western culture can trace its historical lineage back to Genesis in the Bible, where in the Garden of Eden. So it's really the fall from Eden, has been used in this way to promote this reification of nature, especially throughout the Renaissance and Enlightenment periods. And I'm not trying to bag on Christianity. I know there are Christian anarchists, and they're totally legit, and that's a really interesting and powerful take on anarchism. But I think this is, really where it all began, kind of. And I'm going to quote the Bible here. This is Genesis 3:17 to 3:19. To Adam he said, "Because you listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you are taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return." So man became removed from the garden, removed from nature, and forced to work the land to survive, forced to engage in the process of production to survive. And so this is really where it began to lead to subjugation when we get into the Renaissance and Enlightenment era. I'm going to talk a bit about how Carolyn Merchant spoke of this in her book, The Death of Nature. But in the Renaissance era, nature began to be viewed as a machine, and there was this whole idea of the universe as sort of like a clock or a watch that like followed these mechanistic laws, and this is kind of where the idea of humans being a tinkerer that could exploit nature came from. And so humans have began to be able to see nature, began to be able to see themselves as the masters of nature and being able to master it. I had a Francis Bacon quote. There it is. Okay, now this is a Francis Bacon quote that was really relevant. Francis Bacon said, "Man can recover that right over nature which belongs to it by divine conquest." And Francis Bacon here is referencing the fall of Eden. And so this transformative period towards the end of the Renaissance, where we started to get into the Enlightenment, it was influenced by this sort of merging of the new scientism and of Genesis and of the myth of the fall of Eden. So this is really where it came from, and this is how we've gotten to where we are today. Where this idea that humans can and should subjugate nature has led us to exploit it. So we've separated ourselves from nature and elevated ourselves above it as its proclaimed masters. So this is a very authoritarian relationship that has led to a lot of environmental destruction. So it is as John Bellamy Foster would probably say, to paraphrase, it has justified the robbery of the earth for the sake of production. This is a Carolyn Merchant quote. She's a fantastic author that wrote extensively about this topic. She said, as Western culture became increasingly mechanized in the 1600s, the female earth and virgin earth spirit were subdued by the machine, whereas the nurturing earth image can be viewed as a cultural constraint restricting the types of socially and morally sanctioned human actions allowable with respect to the earth. The new images of mastery and domination functioned as cultural sanctions for the denudation of nature. Society needed these new images as it continued the process of commercialism and industrialization, which depend on activities directly altering the earth. So I know I might be starting to sound like a primmy at this point, and shout out to our ANPRIM comrades. We love you, but I'm definitely not a primmy, and I hope that'll become clear. I'm just trying to outline where this view, this authoritarian view, and this authoritarian relationship towards nature came from in terms of its historical development, and it really goes back way, way deep. And the thing is, as I said, this is no surprise because the way that we view and treat each other is going to be reflected in our attitudes and interactions with the rest of the biosphere on this planet. So now, as anarchists, again, applying the anarchist critique, we have to ask ourselves, does the position of authority our society has claimed over the rest of the natural world justify itself? Because we are a part of nature, yet we are claiming to be separate from it, we are claiming to be its masters, and we are claiming that we have the right to exploit it for whatever means we want. Whether you want to critique capitalism and say it's for production, or whether you want to, or whether you're even like the Soviets and you believe that, we should achieve socialism and we should achieve a socialist utopia by industrializing and increasing production. This whole position, this authoritarian position over nature really transcends different modes of political economy. This view has been shared by many different kinds of societies throughout the past. It was present in the Greeks, it was present in medieval society in some form, it was present during the Renaissance, and so in pre-capitalist societies today, and even in many socialist societies. So this view has pervaded many societies throughout history. And so now, if this justifies itself or if it doesn't, what have the consequences been of this view? If not, how can we relate to nature in an anarchist way? And so what we have here is a global map of biodiversity loss, showing the change in species richness. And you can see that the greatest losses of biodiversity have been in prime agricultural lands. You see right there the Great Plains of the United States, in the Midwest, the plains of Europe, the plains of northern China and India, and the Sahel region, southern Africa, parts of Australia, places in Southeast Asia that have been subject to extensive deforestation for palm oil. All of what you are seeing here is a result of production within our society. This is what has caused this, and this view has justified it. So I hope it's clear that we shouldn't even need to debate this. This authoritarian view of nature has had terrible consequences. And because we view nature in this way, it has caused and justified this exploitation. It's continuing to perpetuate it. So this is an aerial shot of deforestation to establish palm oil plantations in Kalimantan, Indonesia. And this is a huge problem in Southeast Asia and is driving extensive environmental damage and loss of the world's most ancient and pristine rainforests. The rainforests of Borneo are 150 million years old, and they're just being leveled to grow palm oil because we think that, destroying these ecosystems for the sake of whatever our ends are, I'm not saying we, but as a society, and whoever at the top is calling the shots here, it's thought to be okay, and that's the point here. I don't want to blame everybody for this. Like, I think a lot of us would agree that this is atrocious, but it's what I'm trying to say is it's a part of our modern society. And what was I going to say? Yeah. So and the other thing that is a whole extensive rabbit hole is how the ethic of preservation is juxtaposed against this, where we level all these ecosystems, but set aside a small portion to be nature preserves, and where nature is not to be touched. You can't touch it at all. All you can do is leave nothing but footprints, and then like this is a whole contradiction that we have within our society, where nature is either destroyed and denuded for the sake of production, or it is cordoned off and so that it could be maintained in a static state, when no ecosystems are static. They exist in a state of dynamic equilibrium. So it's this hugely contradictory and incoherent view of the natural world that we have constructed, and it is not justified. It cannot be justified within the realm of anarchist ethics. So how can we construct an anarchist relationship with nature? So I wanted to introduce the idea of a land ethic, and this is a concept that has been existing in some form for thousands of years. Indigenous societies had land ethics. They had an ethical framework that was oftentimes grounded in their spiritual practices for conducting themselves in relation to the rest of the ecosystems that they inhabit. So a land ethic is an ethical framework for relations and conduct with the land and terrestrial ecosystems specifically. We're talking about terrestrial ecosystems here. The land ethic is kind of specific. We can talk about the earth in general, and having an ethical mutualistic relation with the earth in general. This is what Carolyn Merchant would call a partnership ethic. But here we're going to talk about the land ethic because we're going to talk about agriculture. So a land ethic is an ethical framework for relations and conduct with land and terrestrial ecosystems. And the modern Western concept of a land ethic was formulated by American author Aldo Leopold in his essay that he published, I believe, in 1949. So part of the more sort of contemporary environmental movement, maybe a more radical strain within the movement, because you have a whole spectrum with the environmental movement. You have the moderate liberals who are just like, yes, we can exploit the earth, but as long as we have a lot of protected areas, it's fine. And then you have people like me, where it's like, no, we have to completely reconstruct the way we relate with nature. We have to have an ecological society if we even want our civilization to survive in the first place. And the indigenous people have understood this for thousands of years, that you have to have an ecological society in order to survive long term. And these indigenous societies have survived for thousands of years and lived in harmony with the planet. I mean, there are food forests in Central America and the Amazon rainforest that are still being tended by indigenous peoples to this day, and they've been around for hundreds or thousands of years. So Chief Seattle said that the earth does not belong to man, but man belongs to the earth. All things are connected like the blood which unites one's family. And this is very reflective of the indigenous land ethic and the indigenous relationship with the natural world. And so let's talk about Aldo Leopold. He was a huge inspiration to me when I was first getting into environmental philosophy, because I've been concerned about environmental issues ever since I was a child. I saw what was happening to the rainforests, and when I was probably 6 or 7 years old, that's what really got me to be concerned and like really invested in environmentalism and the environmental movement, is seeing this and understanding that and grasping it from an early age. And so when I came across Aldo Leopold's land ethic, I was like, wow, this is great. And it does have its limitations, but I think we can map it to anarchism. And that's kind of what part of this presentation is going to be about, the applicability of the idea of a land ethic to anarchism. I'm going to check the time. Okay, we're doing great on time. So Aldo Leopold said, the land ethic simply enlarges the boundaries of the community to include soils, waters, plants, and animals, or collectively, the land. In short, a land ethic changes the role of Homo sapiens from conqueror of the land community to plain member and citizen of it. It implies respect for his fellow members and also respect for the community as such. So Aldo Leopold also says, when we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect. And I think Bookchin would agree with this wholeheartedly, this statement at least. I'm not sure what he thought about Leopoldian ethics in general, but I see this idea of land as a community to which we belong as being very compatible with an anarchist environmental ethic and an anarchist way of relating to the natural world. And so his son, Luna Leopold, also said, rather than interpreting the concept of the land ethic as an indication of disregard for the individual in favor of the species or the ecosystem, my view is quite different. I see the concept of the land ethic as the outgrowth and extension of his deep personal concern for the individual, accepting the idea that the cooperations and competitions in human society are eased and facilitated by concern for others. He saw the same consideration extended to other parts of the ecosystem would tend to add integrity, beauty, and stability to the whole. And so sort of arising out of this, if we have an anarchist take on this, is the idea of mutual aid with nature. And this is a good basis for our anarchist land ethic. And so this is what I think would be features of an anarchist land ethic. First of all, non-hierarchy. Obviously, we believe in critiquing and abolishing hierarchies that cannot justify themselves. So in an anarchist view, humans cannot master nature, nor are we intrinsically superior to other life forms. And so the idea here is mapping the anarchist ethic of non-hierarchy onto the relationship with the land that we live on. We see the land as a community that we are a part of, and this leads directly into the second principle I have outlined here, non-duality. The idea that human society is a part of nature, which is treated as a subject. It is treated as a living system that has intrinsic value, that needs to be respected and treated as a living system, and not as an object that is simply a collection of lesser beings, because that's really how our society views the natural world right now, as something over there, outside of our outside of our cities that we have built and the towns that we live in and our farms, that is comprised of lesser beings, and either it should be exploited or should be cordoned off and preserved, like implying you could even preserve ecosystems. That just doesn't make sense when you understand ecology. And I also wrote, when we view ourselves as part of a greater ecological community, we begin to see the other beings we share the land with as having equal right to it, and non-human communities and human communities in general as having equal right to it. And then the third feature of an anarchist land ethic, I would say, is fair share. And this is something I'm deriving from the ethics of permaculture design. We'll talk briefly about that towards the end of the presentation. So the idea of fair share is instead of trying to compete with other life forms and trying to domineer them and domineer the land, we must work to share the bounty of the land with other life forms and not hoard it. So this egalitarian, holistic view of nature that arises from non-hierarchy and non-duality demands an ethic of fair share. Among the inhabitants of the land. So not only do we need to create a habitat for ourselves, a human habitat, our habitat that we create needs to be accessible to other life forms, and we need to cooperate with other life forms. And this leads directly into the fourth and probably the most anarchist feature in terms of praxis, mutual aid. Human society and the rest of the Earth's biosphere can work together to support each other. And I want to, sort of critique another myth that is present within our society that sort of applies to the idea of preservation that has become so pervasive within liberal environmentalism. The idea that we should set aside these wilderness preserves that, where people leave nothing but footprints, is that, we can actually help nature. We can be a team player. We can improve the ecosystems around us through our action and through our creative action and our creative management of the land. So the anarchist ethic of mutual aid calls us to go beyond simply coexisting with other life forms and begin helping them flourish as much as they help us flourish. So, we'll talk more about what this means in practice, but, we can create essentially a Garden of Eden. We can recreate Eden, as Francis Bacon wanted to do, but we can recreate an Eden where everybody gets to participate, not just us. We're not the we're not the masters. We're not the ones who are domineering everybody else and sort of exploiting everything else, but we're just kind of like facilitators, and we're one of many facilitators. We're not the only facilitators that will be present in such a system. So I wanted to also say that, and this is something that was discussed in the Permaculture Design course I'm taking, cooperation is a law of nature. The establishment and stability of ecosystems is facilitated by mutualistic relationships. And then this is something that Peter Kropotkin talked about extensively as well, how mutualism and mutual aid is a law of nature. And, honestly, I believe that the modern science of ecology owes so much to Peter Kropotkin and his insights and how he looked at different organisms throughout the natural world and how he saw that they cooperated with one another. And just, it's really something that is so present, and we're learning more and more about how extensive and pervasive these mutualistic forms of symbiosis, where you have two different species that actually help each other out and provide mutual aid to each other, how common that is. And literally the reestablishment of ecosystems after a disturbance is not possible without mutualism. And when it comes to plants, one of the most important families of plants for reestablishing ecosystems are the legumes, the nitrogen fixers. They partner with these bacteria, rhizobia, that are capable of taking nitrogen directly out of the atmosphere. The bacteria exchange the nitrogen to the plants in exchange for sugars and proteins that the plants provide to the bacteria to facilitate their growth. It's mutual aid. And without this, the land would stay barren. If I go out into my garden and, we'll talk a bit about my garden and what I've done as an application of this anarchist land ethic, but it was barren soil, and one of the only plants that would grow there at all is this plant called Burr Medic, Medicago polymorpha, and it is a nitrogen fixer that forms this relationship with the bacteria. So let's talk about industrialized agriculture then, the way that we produce our food. This is a direct reflection of this authoritarian relationship that we have constructed with the rest of the biosphere. So I wanted to note that agriculture produces 23% of all greenhouse gas emissions. This is almost as much as the energy sector. When we talk about climate change, oftentimes it's we need to stop burning fossil fuels. We need to stop cutting down forests, which reduces greenhouse gas emissions. We need to switch to green energy. And yes, we need to do that, but people don't talk about agriculture and how big of an impact it has and the way that we practice it. So these emissions come from habitat destruction, first of all. So again, looking back at that map that I showed you of that I showed you all of biodiversity loss. We'll go back really quick. All these places you see with the highest biodiversity loss, most of them are prime agricultural land. They're the grasslands. It's where the food is being grown on our planet, And so, this is no coincidence. So the land is cleared way to make for factory farms. And what are you doing when you clear land? When you burn a forest or cut down a forest or, destroy a prairie, And you're setting back the clock of ecological succession. That is the progression of ecosystems. And what do you get when you do that? You get weeds. You get these plants that try to reestablish the ecosystem, and we call these plants weeds. And then what do we do? What does industrial agriculture do? I don't want to keep referring to we. We don't have, you and I and you, me and you all. We don't really have much of a hand in this, do we? We're not deciding how the land is managed, in these big industrial farms. But then what is done, I should say? This land is planted with a single crop, a monoculture. So the fields are planted with a single crop intended to by machines. Now, is a monoculture something you really see in a healthy ecosystem? No way. Absolutely not. So this is an unstable state for an ecosystem to have a monoculture, because a farmland is an ecosystem, whether we want to view it as one or not. And again, this whole idea that, when when humans touch nature, it becomes unnatural. That's a myth. It's a total myth. And we can see that, because when we have a mechanized monoculture, what comes back to try and reset the ecosystem? The weeds come back, the pests come in, because what are pests? They pests in ecosystems, they deal with the overpopulation of a single organism. They're the crops that are being grown in these fields. It's overpopulation. Like they're consuming too many resources. And then obviously, I'm not going to talk about overpopulation, how it applies to humans. That is a whole other conversation. And I'm not saying the world is overpopulated, but the fields that are certainly overpopulated with corn, are certainly overpopulated with soybeans and wheat, and whatever else is being grown on these 1,000-acre tracts of land, this single crop, and so the weeds and the pests come in to try and restore the balance, because we like this artificially unbalanced ecosystem has been created. You're working against entropy when you do this. So then the weeds and the pests come in even more. When you destroy the habitat, weeds and pests come in. Weeds and pests. When you plant a monoculture, weeds and pests come in. And also when you plant a monoculture, you deplete the soil. So you deplete the soil when you plant a monoculture, then what? You have to apply fertilizer to return the nutrients to the soil, because the nutrients aren't being returned to the soil by the crop. The crops are harvested, the nutrients are going out of the soil, and the residues are burned or trashed or whatever, and like especially the nitrogen is depleted from the soil. So then what do we do? Or what is done? I should say, petrochemical fertilizers are applied to the field, and you know what that's a picture of? That is a tanker full of anhydrous ammonia. Literally, anhydrous ammonia is sprayed onto these fields. What does that do to all the organisms that inhabit the soil and facilitate the proper cycling and availability of nutrients when you spray literally like cleaner onto the soil? A chemical that is used to disinfect and clean things. What does that do? It kills them all. They're dead. All of the organisms that kept the soil healthy and allowed plants to thrive there have been killed now. And so now you've gotten your plants hooked on this chemical. It's like getting them hooked on drugs. So you have to keep applying more and more fertilizers. And these fertilizers, these chemical fertilizers, are applied because they promote the standardization of yields and standardization. And how do you think these fertilizers are produced? These nitrogenous fertilizers, ammonia, ammonium nitrate. They're made from fossil fuels. They're made from oil through the Haber-Bosch process. So, not only is our energy sector dependent on fossil fuels, but the agricultural sector is too. We're literally spraying petroleum products onto the fields, or petroleum products are literally being sprayed onto the fields. And it kills all the organisms. And so we're turning back the clock of succession even more. Now we don't even have soil. We have dirt. It's dead, with maybe some bacteria in it, because really only some bacteria can survive this. All the fungi that support, many of the crops that you want to grow, because you need to have fungi in the soil, the mycorrhizal fungi and the decomposers, they're dead. The ammonia kills them. So then what? Some organisms start trying to come back. The weeds that like to grow with the bacteria try to come back even more. So more weeds, then the application of these fertilizers, because it destroys the soil health, the plants end up becoming weaker because they don't have all these soil organisms to protect them from diseases. So now what? Pesticides. So now we make the problem. So now the problem is could be made worse. So this kills off the soil organisms even more, and it becomes a vicious cycle where you have to keep applying these synthetic fertilizers, and keep applying these toxic pesticides just to maintain yields. And you have to use more and more of them, and then use stronger and stronger pesticides. And so, this is just like insanity. It's destroying the land, it's destroying the water, it's destroying the air, and again, a lot of the excess fertilizer that remains on the fields, it either gets washed into the rivers, causing algae blooms in the Gulf of Mexico, right off of the coast of Louisiana, the size of the state of Massachusetts, and the rest of it goes into the air as Nitrous oxide, a greenhouse gas that is 230 times more potent than carbon dioxide. 230 times. And then now, because all this is happening, we only have 60 years of topsoil left, because all of this, with no biology to hold the soil in place, the soil is just washing away. It's blowing away and it's washing away. And in 60 years, we won't be able to grow food in it. There will be no soil. It'll be like impossible or extremely difficult to grow things in it, you know? And so we're looking at a doomsday clock right here. This is a doomsday clock that people oftentimes don't talk about or don't know about. 60 years. And that's on top of all the other ecological problems we're facing. So not only will climate change make agriculture a lot more difficult in prime agricultural lands, but the topsoil is being destroyed. We won't have any more. So this has to change. This has to change. So all of these practices have the effect of destroying the soil structure and polluting the air, the water, and the soil. And our food that we're eating. We're putting this food that is being grown this way into our mouths, into our bodies. What effects is that having? Like, who knows what kinds of pesticides are being used? Like, these don't get tested adequately. Many of them probably aren't even tested. There's been this whole effort in the state of California, where I live, to ban this pesticide that is used on like fruit trees and almond trees called chlorpyrifos. And it's a neurodevelopmental toxin. Like, its effects are very similar to lead when babies are exposed to it in the womb, when fetuses are exposed to it. And like, this is being sprayed onto the fields. It's being sprayed everywhere. All of this crap. And that's getting into our bodies. Like, this, it's hurting us directly too. So this cannot continue. So like, we have to really think here, like, what can we do? Like, because this is the norm, like, many people are under the impression, like, I've seen people say this, feeding the world is impossible without this industrial system of agriculture. It can't happen. It's impossible. You have to use synthetic fertilizers. You have to use these toxic pesticides to feed the growing population. And, I'm here to tell you, it's bullshit. It's total bullshit. Like, it's fucking bullshit. And then what's even more bullshit is the idea of over the world being overpopulated, because with this system, we currently produce enough food to feed 10 billion people, and we could easily produce more, because the methods I'm about to talk about literally produce more food, like, than is being produced industrially. Like, per unit of land, more calories are literally can be produced this way. So the question is then, what if we can heal the land as we farm instead of destroying it? And yes, we can. Like, people think, this is too good to be true. Like, agriculture has destroyed, the environment, ever since it became a thing. And it's like, no. Agriculture is not the problem here. It's the way that it is being practiced right now, and has been practiced throughout many societies. Like, it's thought that the fall of the Roman Empire was caused by improper agricultural practices. The Mayan Empire, a lot of this is a pattern throughout history. When you have these big empires that develop, and become very authoritarian, the land becomes treated in an authoritarian way, and then the soil is exhausted, and the empires can't feed themselves, and they collapse. Like, this is a trend throughout history. So we need something better. And then this is when we're going to talk about regenerative agriculture as the application of an anarchist land ethic. So regenerative agriculture creates the conditions for soil regeneration, and therefore heals the land and restores biodiversity. All regenerative agriculture does is replicate ecological succession, the process that I just talked about, that all of industrialized agriculture has to constantly fight against, because it destroys the environment. Has to constantly fight against. We're going to work with it instead. We're going to understand that process. We're going to work with it. We're going to use it to heal the land. We're going to use it to bring back biodiversity and grow an abundance of food. And so all regenerative agriculture does is replicate that process. And so this project, that I call it the Resilience Garden Project. It's cataloged on my channel. So you can see in March 2020, there's my aquaponic system in the back. The land right there is barren. Like, you have moss growing on it. Like, it's just dirt. Like, it's like cement. It's like cement. I couldn't even get through it with a shovel. Like, I had to use to get through it. I had to use literally this 20-pound iron digging bar, and the soil had been left uncovered and exposed to the elements for years, and so it just kind of died. you know? So I saw this land, you know, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and, you know, the pandemic happening. I was just like, shit, you know, I have to know how to grow food in the soil, you know, because I've been doing aquaponics for all these years. I know a thing or two about soil, but I really have to buckle down and learn how to grow food in the ground, you know, because, you know, all of you know, like, can see as anarchists where our civilization is headed, you know, in terms of like politically, you know, that's like, you know, the major topic within anarchism is like the rise of fascism and authoritarianism, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And you know, the governments and the corporations are trying to control us more and more and more and more. And soon, like, you know, like, and like the way that we resist this is by growing food, by growing our own food, like by not being dependent on them, you know. So I realize, you know, I need to reduce my dependence on this system. I need to, and I need to know how to not be dependent on it if shit goes to hell. And I need to know how to take a patch of barren dirt and turn it into living soil. And that's exactly what I did. You can see in December how different that soil looks. And then like in September, how even in the first season, like I was surprised by how much the garden was thriving. It was incredible, really. In regenerative agriculture, it's like you see the results, and it's like happening in front of your eyes, and it feels like a miracle, like a legitimate miracle. So, and it is like basically, and you know, this is a large scale regenerative agriculture project in the Loess Plateau in China. Like an entire ecosystem was turned from a desert back into like a prairie and forests, like in the course of like a decade or so. And it's amazing what can be done. And see, this is the quote that I feel really hits home. Jeff Lawton, the permaculture teacher, said, "We can be the most beneficial element on Earth instead of the most damaging." And that is so pertinent, and people really need to understand that. And like, you know, I feel like if as anarchists we take that to heart, you know, not only can we regenerate the Earth from, you know, all this destruction that is being caused by our modern industrial civilization, and we can, you know, through an anarchist system of agriculture, an anarchist land ethic, and an anarchist politic, we can heal the Earth. We really can. So I highly recommend this film that's on YouTube for free. It's called Regretting the Desert with John D. Liu. And then like I watched this, and I watched this, you know, knowing about all these principles, and I was like, I was floored. I was floored by like this project and how successful it was, and like the results. It was just, it blew my mind. And like, you know, I highly recommend you watch it. It's incredible. So, and here's the other thing. Regenerative agriculture can sequester over 100% of annual CO2 emissions, or greenhouse gas emissions, not CO2, not just CO2. And do this while healing the land, while improving our soils, while restoring biodiversity, while healing ecosystems. It all could be done. We can do it. It's just changing the way that the land is cultivated. That's all it is. It's amazing. It's the simplest solution ever. Like people talk about, like a lot of these, you know, the fossil fuel lobby especially talks about, oh, we need to do carbon capture and sequestration in the ground. We make these big factories that pump all the CO2, liquefy the CO2 and pump it underground. It's like, no, it's bullshit. We don't need to do that. We just need to change the way we manage the land. That's it. And obviously, you know, cut our emissions, you know, because we should do that at the same time. But like, you know, we need to go the other direction too, and this is how we go the other direction. Not by building these fucking factories to put the CO2 back in the ground. It's bullshit. No, it's a waste. This is what we do. So I'm not kidding. Like this is research. Like this is known. The Riddell Institute did a whole white paper on it, a whole paper. Like that references all this peer-reviewed literature. It can be done. The Rodale Institute is one of the most respected institutions that promotes organic farming in the world. And they're all, it's all science and research based. Their whole mission is to research organic techniques and regenerative techniques. And they put out this paper. I highly recommend you read it. You can get it online for free. It's like I want to say like 40 pages. It's worth, if you're really interested in learning more about this and its benefits, I would really recommend reading this. And I'll have more free resources, a list of more free resources available at the end of the presentation. So definitely check this out. So by combining regenerative cropping, so like actually cultivating lands to grow crops, and this is the other one that's big, regenerative grazing, changing the way we graze the land with livestock, because livestock are, grazing animals are a part of grassland ecosystems. If we replicate how they graze in grassland ecosystems, and this is something that Alan Savory understood. Check out Alan Savory and his work. And there's this whole regenerative grazing movement now, and it's really starting to gain traction. And there have been studies done on this. Like, you can literally sequester carbon by changing the way cattle are grazed. And the potential is massive. Like, all this land that was destroyed, like all that land, we can heal it just by changing the way that we manage it. That's all. So let's talk about the 7 tendencies towards regeneration in the Rodale Institute. Pluralism: increase the diversity of plant, animal, microbe, and fungus species. So increase the diversity of life on your farm or in your garden. Protection: keep the soil covered to conserve moisture and protect soil organisms, because in ecosystems, the soil is always covered. If you have barren soil, it's going to get colonized by weeds. That's just what's going to happen. Daddy? I'm going to talk, buddy. If you have barren soil, that's when the weeds move in, because Mother Nature, or whoever you want to talk about it, she wants to cover the soil, or they or whatever, like Mother Nature or nature wants to cover the soil, because exposed soil is going to erode. So the weeds are adapted to these conditions, and they will come in and cover the soil and begin regenerating it. So we want to learn from that. We want to replicate it. We want to cover the soil, and we'll talk about how to do that. So purity, and I don't like this term. I don't like the word purity, but this is the word they use, because the term purity, when used in the context of environmentalism, can have very eco-fascist implications. So I want to make that clear. I don't like that term, but I like the principle. So refrain from using toxic agrochemicals and damaging the environment. So that's very important, because it's that environmental damage that comes from using those synthetics that turn back the clock of succession and damage the land. Permanence: an emphasis on perennial plants and cultivation systems where possible. And again, ecological succession. You start out with your annual weeds, your perennial grasses, and then your bushes and your brush, and then it goes to forest. That's ecological succession. If you have enough rainfall to have a forest, of course. It might. Here in California, in much of California, the successional clock stops at what's called a chaparral ecosystem, or a sage scrub ecosystem, which is like it's just like shrubland, or it might stop at perennial grassland in some places. And then the clock is set back naturally by fire. Like, it's a whole cycle. Succession is cyclical. It's not linear. Like, it's oftentimes taught as a linear process within ecology, but that's also a product of this whole ideology of nature is supposed to be untouched or whatever. And it's really cyclical. Like, disturbances happen. We just have to understand how to manage disturbance. Peace: use agroecology techniques to disrupt pest outbreaks and weather natural disasters. So instead of trying to kill all the pests, with the pesticides or whatever, that's not. We have to understand what's causing the pest outbreaks to happen. We need to understand what's causing the pest outbreaks to happen. We need to understand what's causing the weeds to grow. And what that is it's a deficiency in the ecosystem. So we use agroecology, we use ecology applied to agriculture to create a sustainable and stable farmland ecosystem or ranch ecosystem that exists in a state of dynamic equilibrium, so that the conditions are unfavorable for the weeds and the pests, and so that the ecosystem is stable and can weather natural disasters, and it can adapt, because it totally can. Our industrial system, it's not stable at all. It can't adapt. The more drastic the environmental stressors become, the harder it is to maintain the system. And eventually we're going to get to a point where it just collapses, and we'll have food shortages. It's just going to happen. And so we need to change the system of agriculture so that it can actually be resilient in the face of these disasters, in the face of climate change. And then potential. So focus on increasing the potential of the soil to support healthy plants. Feed the soil, not the plants. This is the mantra that's repeated in regenerative agriculture, and even in organic agriculture. Feed the soil, not the plants. Plants are a product, they're a consequence of healthy soil. Your food that you're growing is a consequence of healthy soil, not the other way around. You're not trying to make the soil, you're not trying to, cultivate the soil just to grow food. You're trying to manage the soil so that food is produced as a result. Then progress. With proper management, yields and efficiency increase over time because it's regenerative or even generative. The system improves over time. It goes through the process of ecological succession. It becomes more productive, more stable, more resilient, and more biodiverse, and more inviting to your local wildlife. It was amazing. Like this summer, I saw a garter snake in my garden. I found a garter snake. I've never seen a garter snake here ever. I've never seen a garter snake in my backyard ever. And then I go up there, I heal the soil, I plant this garden. We've got a garter snake, and the garter snake is now controlling the pests. It's controlling the pests. So now you're inviting in the predators that keep the pests in check. And this is how it's done. You create a stable ecosystem, a self-regulating ecosystem, because the industrial monocultures, they're completely incapable of self-regulating. If you build a self-regulating system, you invite in your local ecology, then you won't have pests, you won't have weeds, or you'll have some, but they won't be a problem. I've never sprayed a single drop of pesticides in my garden, a single drop ever. And now I have all these predators that are taking care of the pests for me, So let's be more specific. So you ask me, Mr. Solarpunk Farmer, can you be more specific? You're talking about all these things. It's like so general and abstract. So like, how do I do it? What do I do? You showed me these amazing pictures of what you did to your soil. What happened? How did you do it? Okay, 4 things. Soil microbiome maintenance. So introduce and maintain soil organism populations with high quality compost and inoculums. I'm a huge fan of composting. If you can compost, please compost. People like to think, even in the gardening world, in the organic gardening world, oh, I make compost to fertilize my plants. Okay, great. Yes, compost contains nutrients, but that's not really the point. Compost is not a fertilizer. It's an inoculum. It is a cross section of your soil community, your soil food web. And when you introduce compost to barren soil, you're introducing soil biology. That's what you're doing, and that's why it's important to have high quality compost. And you can also use compost to make these other products or concoctions that you apply to your soil. I have various recipes, but like compost tea is a big one. There's another one that you could use called compost extract. I also practice vermicomposting, where you actually construct a habitat for a specific species of earthworm called red wigglers, and then you put your food scraps in there, and then like shredded paper and then leaves and stuff, and they break it down for you, and it produces some of the highest quality compost ever. So you're creating, your compost pile, your worm farm. That is your living inoculum for your soil. That is where it's like the point where you centralize all of your soil biology, or much of it. The decomposers, at least. There's another class of soil organisms called mutualists, which are like your mycorrhizal fungi. If any of you are in the cannabis world, then you've probably heard of mycorrhizal fungi and maybe even used them. But mycorrhizal fungi are like ubiquitous throughout nature, and they support plants. Another example of mutualists would be your rhizobia I talked about earlier, nitrogen-fixing bacteria, partner with plants, and then those can't survive in compost. There are other methods for getting those in, but I'll be covering that on my YouTube channel. So subscribe, please. Let's talk about polyculture. So intercropping. Like people in the gardening world talk about companion planting, and then the way they look at it is like, oh, I'm growing all this lettuce, right? And I'm going to plant marigolds to keep the pests away. And it's like, the purpose of the marigolds, shouldn't be just to keep the pests away. It should be a component of your ecosystem. You should be trying to construct an ecosystem, not just I want to grow this crop and that crop, and then these big, these rows, these big blocks, and have it be all neat and organized, and I'll just plant these couple plants to keep the pests away. No, it's not the right way to think about it, in my opinion. So instead, it's like, oh, let's make a plant community. Let's make a community of plants, an ecosystem of edible plants and useful plants. We can create these ecosystems, these polycultures, these guilds, as they call them in permaculture, especially when you're talking about food forestry. with fruit trees and nut trees, these guilds, of plants that all work together and support each other. Mutual aid. These plants that you make these assemblages of plants that practice mutual aid with one another. That's what polyculture is. That's the right way to think about it. So, yeah, very important, polyculture. Mulching. Mulching is just referring to covering the soil. Like if you're familiar with the term mulching in the landscaping industry, it's like, oh, we're going to lay down wood chips to, keep water in the soil and, or tree bark or whatever, these dyed wood chips. And, it's like, it's going to help conserve moisture if you live in a drought prone climate or you don't get a lot of rain. It's like, yes, it's true. It conserves moisture. That's one of the benefits. And, but what it does is, it keeps the soil covered because, again, in functional ecosystems, the soil is always covered. All these principles, this is how we learn. These principles come directly from what we have learned from how stable ecosystems function and how, and we want to replicate that in our farms and in our gardens. So that's where this comes from. Mulching. So protects soil organisms, prevents erosion, suppresses weeds, and conserves moisture. You can cover it. So a mulch is just like an organic material, either living or dead, that you cover your soil with. You can use wood chips. I use wood chips in my garden. I love wood chips. They're a fantastic mulch. I use fallen leaves from like all the deciduous trees around here. It's good to shred them up if you can, and you're creating that forest or grassland floor environment. That's what you're doing. You're creating an environment that is present in functional ecosystems. The ground layer that is covered with plant material. And so you can use the dead mulches like the leaves and the wood chips, or you can use a living mulch, a cover crop. So a cover crop, well, what is a cover crop? It's a mixture of weeds that you create. You engineer the weed mixture. You create a community of weeds, of weedy plants that, again, practice mutual aid from one another, that benefit from one another, and you sow it in your garden. And it restores the soil. It's a cover crop. An integrated pest management. So model functional ecosystems to create conditions unfavorable to pests. So here's an example. Lots of plants in the carrot family, Apiaceae, I think. They make these umbelliferous flowers. Like if you've ever seen a carrot's flower or Queen Anne's lace or yarrow, same family. And these flowers attract parasitoid wasps. What do parasitoid wasps do? Those cabbage worms, those cabbage worms that have been eating your cabbage and your lettuce, they go up to the cabbage worms, they lay their eggs inside of the cabbage worms, the larvae hatch, parasitize the worm, eat it out from the inside, and it dies. There's your pest control. Your pesticide is the wasp. So you can plant plants like that to attract the predators. And some other plants, they might exude aromatic compounds that repel other pests. Like, for example, marigolds do that. Marigolds also secrete compounds into the soil that suppress parasitic nematodes, like these little worm thingies that live in the soil that parasitize plant roots. And if you plant marigolds, it'll suppress them. So you can include marigolds into your polyculture as well. And of course, marigold flowers you can eat. These plants serve a multitude of functions. And then, of course, going back to the microbiome, managing your microbiome is a part of integrated pest management, maintaining healthy soil with a good soil food web. Because if you have healthy soil with a good community of soil organisms, with a diverse community, then the pests won't be able to survive. All the good guys will outcompete them. Same thing in your garden with your plants, and like your beneficial animals and insects, the mice that come in and bugs that come and eat your plants won't be able to survive. The beetles, because the garter snake that I just attracted to my garden by healing the land and by creating habitat for it, that's another thing, create the habitat for the beneficials, the predators, it's eating the pests now. So that's integrated pest management. Like, not really relying on pesticides or, constructing these ecological relations that, and introducing, organisms that keep the pest populations in check. And you will have some pests, and that's okay. Our farms and gardens do not have to be sterile and completely free of pests. That's not the point. They have a role to play. That the role of these pest organisms in nature is to take out the plants that are weak, the ones that are struggling, and that are consuming resources that could be made available to stronger plants. That's what they're for. It's self-regulation. Pests are a part of the self-regulation of ecosystems. So let's talk about what I did. Okay. So site prep. This is the site. I amended with free compost from the city since my soil was that bad. You can do this without amending. Totally can. But if you have really bad soil like me, use good quality compost. The compost I used wasn't that great. It set me back maybe like 2 months because of that. And my plants didn't get going until I introduced some more good biology. But, I did this by hand. It was a ton of work, took a long time. Use a rototiller. So I basically just dug these beds like 12 inches down and then backfilled with, you see the mounds of soil right there. I backfilled the soil with a bunch of compost that I got for free from the city. I did most of this for free. You can do this for free. That's the other thing we'll talk about. This is dirt cheap. You don't have to spend a lot of money to do regenerative agriculture. You don't have to buy all these stupid products that they sell in the garden stores, and they're useless. So yeah, and just use a rototiller if you can get a hold of one. I really regret not using the rototiller. I could have rented one, but I don't have one. And you generally, part of it is another principle that I didn't really mention here is you don't want to disturb the soil really by tilling it, because that rips up all of the that rips up and kills all of the beneficial organisms. But my soil was dead already, so it's okay, I want to get compost in there. I want to get some organic matter in there, because organic matter, which is decayed remains of all the life forms that live in the soil and on top of the soil, that's the basis of healthy soil. So I wanted to get some of that in there because the soil was basically dead. Nothing would grow in it pretty much. So except for a few stragglers here and there. So I wanted to get some compost in there to improve that situation. And then I mulched over, and those things that you see in the center are oyas. That's an ancient irrigation technique that originated in Africa and China 4,000 years ago using clay pots. Super cool. I did a whole video of that on my channel. You should check it out. So then I amended with free compost from the city. Yeah, I said that already. So that's what the beds look like after. So before, after. See my wildflowers in the strip? Wildflower strip in the back right there. Again, that's I'll use my pointer. Forgot there's a pointer on Google Slides. Yeah, this is my wildflower buffer strip to attract pollinators and predators. Because here we have the monoculture lawn, that gets the chemical fertilizers, and then we have the protective strip, so if the predators try and come in from here, then they hit this and if the pests come in from here, they hit this, is oh, here are your predators, you are now going to get eaten. And then I mulched over afterwards. This was back in March, April, and then I installed the oyas, and 3 other methods I use from here. Compost tea. So your compost tea are your microbial brews containing beneficial soil biology and some nutrients to kickstart the soil food web. It's in this case, again, the nutrients are really to feed the soil. Your soil will have many of the nutrients, especially the micronutrients and then the mineral nutrients it needs to support plants. Most soils have all those nutrients. It's just a matter of mobilizing them. And how do you mobilize the nutrients? How do you get those nutrients to cycle through the system? You introduce the biology that actually mines the nutrients out of the little fragments of rock and dust in the soil and incorporates them into their bodies in organic form, and then in organic form, and then the little bugs in the soil come along and eat them and then release the nutrients so the plants can take them up. Then the plants take up the nutrients, and then the plants grow and die. The nutrients return to the soil. It's a whole cycle. And once you get the biology going, in the soil, that kickstarts the whole process. Once you get biology and living roots in the soil, that kickstarts the process. So compost tea. So basically in compost, the beneficial microbes and fungi live on this kind of especially the bacteria, they live on this microfilm on the surface of the individual aggregate particles in the compost. And so really what you're doing in the compost tea is you're essentially you're putting the compost inside a bucket of water dechlorinated water. Make sure to use dechlorinated water. I like to use aquaponic water since it contains trace nutrients and some more biology. And then they're now suspended in the water. And then what you do is you introduce a food source. So I like to use unsulfured blackstrap molasses. And so you've given them all this food. You can also use humic acids. That's supposed to support the growth of fungi more, because the bacteria like the sugars and the fungi apparently like the humic acids. But so you put all the microbes and the fungi in there, and then all the good stuff in there, and you give it all this food. You give them all this food, and then over the course of 24 to 72 hours, depending on the temperature and how long you want to let the brew grow, let the brew go, depending on your technique or whatever, or in your recipe, you're multiplying them. So you only need a little bit of your compost or your vermicompost, and you multiply them out, and you have this microbe soup, and then you apply that to your soil to introduce the organisms. You can spray it on your plants to protect them from harmful bacteria and fungi, to create like a barrier on the surfaces of the plants. Compost tea is just a great thing to use to get the biology going. Then what I have been doing is called sheet composting. I just released a video on this. You should check it out, explaining the whole process, how I got all the stuff I use for the sheet compost for free. And then this is this is replicating the leaf litter in a forest, getting all these organic materials onto the soil, but in a way where you speed up the process. So you speed up the process by including green materials. And because green materials have lots of nitrogen, and the nitrogen is used by the bacteria and fungi to produce the enzymes they need to actually break down all the material. So you essentially put alternating layers of green material and brown material on top of the soil, and then it composts in place. You're building like a sheet compost, like literally what it is, and it builds topsoil. Like the humus, the humic layer, the O horizon, as they say in soil science, soil morphology, the O horizon, your 7th grade soil morphology class or whatever, that one of my favorite people, Larry Santoyo, likes to talk about. Yeah, so that compost in place builds topsoil. Then your cover crops. So your cover crops are your living roots. They're your engineered weed mixture. So it's a mixture of plants that mobilizes the nutrients. It helps the microbes and the fungi mobilize the nutrients and get them into the system. They improve the soil structure because their roots penetrate into the soil. And then when the plants die, the roots compost in place, and it improves the structure of the soil, because so now you're composting underneath the soil when you use your cover crops. You're making more green material on top, and then the roots are composting underneath. So and then the roots also put out these compounds, these exudates. It's like sugars, proteins, and carbohydrates. So like what we like to eat, sugars, proteins, and carbohydrates, and that stimulates the biology even more, the biology that you just added from the compost tea. And then the sheet compost built the topsoil that you need, that the cover crops would really benefit from, especially if you are using later succession cover crops that are more aggressive. And then the cover crops stimulate the biology. So now you've gotten your system going. Simple as that. Like these 3 techniques that you can do for very cheaply: produce your own compost to make compost tea, get the sheet compost materials for free, and buy the cover crop seeds for really cheaply. Just water them and watch them grow. And for the most part, they don't really need fertilizer. If your soil is bad as mine, I would add some fertilizer, unless you're using legumes, your nitrogen fixers. They in my experience, it doesn't look like they really need it in my soil. I'm growing those ones out of like almost completely untreated soil. I added a light sprinkling of compost just to introduce some organic matter and biology over this. This is in the soil around the garden beds. And then I just added some compost tea, and I fertilized once because I put some tillage radish in there, and some daikon radish. Those are used in cover crop mixes, daikon radish. And they were struggling a bit because there wasn't enough nitrogen in the system yet. So I'm like, okay, I'll just give them some nitrogen, and they've been looking a little better. But the clovers and the hairy vetch that I included in the mix, they produce their own nitrogen from the rhizobia. They partner with the rhizobia to fix nitrogen, so they don't need fertilizer really. And then you can do this. It's dirt cheap. It's so easy. Like your costs are really limited to your seeds, and then you might need some small amounts of organic fertilizer to get everything going. You'll need some tools, I like the idea of a tool library. This is something our anarchists can do, is make a tool, get together with your friends, pool together your tools and have a tool library so that you all can garden, you know, just borrow, check out tools from the tool library and bring them back, you know. I love that idea. And I'm looking into starting one here eventually, you know, like all my friends, you know, are all spread out across the Los Angeles area. So it's a bit more difficult, but you know, I don't have a lot of local friends per se. I'm kind of in a weird part of the city. But this is something I'm looking into starting, especially as some of my friends get into gardening more. It's like, yeah, like let's make a tool library. I have a wood chipper, I have a sawzall, a reciprocating saw. I have all these tools. Like, you know, if you need to, you know, borrow tools, just check it out and, you know, bring it back to me. We'll agree upon, you know, a time frame. And if you need more time, just let me know. Just let me know in advance. You know, like it's just mutual aid. It's so simple. Like, you know, it's just like, you know, helping each other out and helping each other grow food, like lending each other tools. And, you know, when my other friends get tools, like, oh, you know, you have this tool, can I borrow it? Or literally the other day I went to my friend's house because he had he had a router. I don't have a router. And I was building this press to make hay bales for my permaculture design course that I'm taking. And like I just went over to his house and he helped me route out this piece that we needed for it. And, you know, just like, you know, you just need a network of people who have tools and you can do this, you know. And then transportation for materials, like if you need to bring in compost, like it's good for somebody in your group to have like a car or a truck, and so you can go to the compost yard, pick up some compost, go to the store, do whatever. But like, you know, it's so cheap. And then of course you just need land. And, you know, I believe in guerrilla gardening. I love guerrilla gardening. I'm doing a guerrilla gardening project on some land above my house that's managed by somebody. I mean, it's our land, but, you know, I don't want to say too much, but, you know, like it's an interesting situation. So, but, you know, the point is, like, you know, I'm cultivating the land when, you know, it's not exactly sanctioned, so it's guerrilla gardening, sort of a gray area. Not illegal. It's not illegal. It's just homeowners association bylaws and bullshit. Liability. But yeah. Yeah, so the inoculums can be produced cheaply on site. Again, your compost tea, your compost, so easy. Like literal trash. Like take the trash from your kitchen, throw it into a pile. You're composting. You know, take the leaves that fall from the trees, add them there. You know, you've got a good compost pile. And then sheet compost. Those materials can be required for free. I used free wood chips. I used, you know, the leaves that fell around my yard. I cut some tree branches down and used the green leaves. I chopped and dropped my crops. Like that's another thing we do is we want to keep the roots in the soil when we grow crops. So we don't uproot our crops at the end of the season. We just cut them at ground level. And like I use all that refuse for the bottom layer of the sheet compost. Seriously, check out my video. Here's the link again if you want to see exactly how I did that. And then, yeah, like regenerative agriculture is a technical vehicle which enables an anarchist land ethic. And so this is all, and like when you start practicing this, you start to think differently. You start to think along the lines of what I like to call a regenerative mindset. How did I define it? So I summed up the regenerative mindset with the idea that by listening to and understanding nature, we can help it heal. By listening to ourselves and our bodies and each other, we can heal ourselves and our communities and build stronger bonds between one another. The regenerative mindset is grounded in the idea of cooperation between us and nature and between each other, and is therefore radical and egalitarian. It's mutual aid. That's what the foundation of the regenerative mindset, in my opinion, is mutual aid. You know, so it sort of lends itself to egalitarian social relations. Because again, like social ecology, you know, when you start to change the way you view the rest of the life forms on this earth and in the communities of life, you begin to view the people in your life differently. You begin to see them, you know, as partners and you know what you're trying to do rather than as potential competition. You know, it's like we could all it's like join me, you know, let's heal the earth, you know, like join me, you know, let's go do a project, you know, let's you know do that. And like I really like this quote from Bookchin. Agriculture becomes the practical day-to-day interface of soil and human communities, the means by which both meet and blend. The food cultivator must live on intimate terms with a given area of land and develop a sensitivity for its special needs that no textbook approach can possibly encompass. The food cultivator must be part of a soil community in the very meaningful sense that he or she belongs to a unique biotic system as well as a given social system. So this is, you know, really one of the most key elements of regenerative agriculture is you need to develop a relationship with your land. You need to listen to the land. You need to be sensitive to its needs. You need to care for the land. And when you begin to do that, you feel more inclined to care for the people in your life. Like I live with my parents, and then like as I've been doing this, I'm like, oh my God, you guys, like, what do you want to grow in the garden? Tell me so we can have nice meals. And, with my friends, it's like, oh, I have all these vegetables, let me share them with you. Do you want, some herbs? I give my partner stuff all the time. She's great. I know she's listening to this. I love you. And it's just like, developing that sensitivity, and then, that sensitivity towards the land, translates itself, I think, into the sensitivity towards people. It's just, it's like compassion that starts with the land that bleeds over to compassion within your social relationships, and then vice versa. It becomes like a sort of spiral of compassion and mutual aid. It's beautiful. So let's talk about growing a movement. What can we do as individuals? We're in the middle of a pandemic. We're isolated from everyone. We talk about organizing. It's the most difficult time to organize of all, pretty much, at least that in our living memory, so what can we do? Like, practice regenerative agriculture and apply permaculture at home. We'll talk about permaculture in a minute, because permaculture is all this in a broader sense. So practice regenerative agriculture. Do it. Just go out there and cultivate the land. And if you need help with that, please contact me. You can message me through my Instagram. I'll give you my Instagram details. I'm always happy to give guidance and advice. I believe, I've been studying all this and working so hard to learn about this for so long. And, of course, as somebody who really believes in anarchist values, knowledge should be free, and if you need that knowledge, if you need help, I will help you. Sharing knowledge and education is mutual aid. I'm happy to help. Please contact me if you want guidance. I will answer any questions you have to the best of my abilities. And we'll have time for Q&A after this, it looks like, since we went over. Actually, we're running out of time, so I'm going to speed through the rest of this. This is a long presentation. So peer, educate your friends and do some guerrilla gardening with them. Guerrilla gardening is a great, subversive activity you can do with your friends. My partner and I, we went out to that hillside and we're planting a food forest, so do guerrilla gardening, find a piece of land in your community that has been neglected, that, needs to be healed, and just go there and plant some food, whether that's just planting a couple trees there, or, having a full-scale garden, and maybe see, like, through your efforts, if you could actually acquire rights to the land after a certain period of time. And there's been a whole movement for that in Los Angeles that's been very successful. Community. Now we scale it up. This is succession. This is succession modeling. Just like as you start with barren ground, you start with a little sprout of a weed, if you want to call it, a pioneer plant, the individual. We move up to a forest, a revolutionary forest, established, and now we're in the middle. Where we're starting to really regenerate things and create an ecosystem, establish community gardens, and teach children about ecology. I'm really big on teaching children. I have a son. I teach him about this stuff, about like regenerative agriculture and the importance of partnering with the land, and like how we can, heal the earth. Yes, we have all these issues, but we can heal it. So teach children about ecology and about healing the earth. They're the next generation. They're the people who we're going to pass the torch on to. It's a big job. We have a lot to do to heal the land and heal humanity. So teach children about this. Make sure that they have the resources, and push for curriculum in schools. Gardening curriculums. That have like this sort of foundation in regenerative agriculture. And then from there, like, we've created a base. We've created a bunch of educated people. Not only ourselves and our peers, but children who are going to then go on and continue this. And now we have a movement. So prefigure and build a new food system to feed a budding revolution. And when I say revolution, that term can mean a lot of things. People oftentimes associate that term with violence and, like overthrowing the government. And it's like, yes, that's one angle that you could take, but that's not the angle that I take. I believe that a revolution is, really just coming together to work to change the system. That's all it is. Work to change the system, to to transform it on a systemic level, and that's, once we've built that community, it can translate into a movement where now, through prefigurative politics, as we talk about in the realm of anarchism, we literally build a revolution. We build a new civilization from the ground up. We build a free ecological civilization where humans partner with nature along the lines of an anarchist, egalitarian land ethic. So now we've created our revolution. We're remaking society by doing it, by cultivating the land, by building community. That's what I mean by revolution here. So yeah, let's talk about permaculture design really briefly. So permaculture design provides a more holistic framework for partnering with nature. So definitely look into this. Permaculture design is a system of problem solving and decision-making protocols based on the patterns of nature. So this is taking regenerative agriculture, where we learn from nature to regenerate the earth, and scaling it up to our communities, to the way that we construct housing, to the way that we relate to one another, to our economic relations, to our politics, to everything. I believe there's a huge intersection between permaculture design and anarchist politics. So definitely check out permaculture, please. And I wanted to wrap things up with this quote from the Yanomami tribe, one of the Amazonian tribes in Brazil who have, faced a lot of oppression there, and like colonization of their lands. So this quote is: "The environment is not separate from ourselves. We are inside it, and it is inside us. We make it, and it makes us." So now that the environment has been degraded, we need to make it better. We need to heal it, and in doing so, heal ourselves. And here's some additional free resources. Now's the time to take a screenshot. So just if you want like these resources, I'm going to leave this slide on for a minute. I'm going to see if I can get onto the stream. I'm wondering if anybody has any questions, because I want to open the floor up really quickly if we have time. Okay, yeah, so, all right, that's fine, Logan. Yeah, so then my YouTube channel, check me out on YouTube and check out my Instagram. Follow me, please. And I will get on the stream now from my phone and answer questions if you have any questions. If there's any questions at all, open this page in your browser. Okay. Open Ecology. I like Ecology. Plant trees. All right, it's not letting me enter from my phone, so I'll just end my screen share. Sorry for taking so long. I was hoping that we had time to answer questions, but please, if you have questions, just hit me up on Instagram. Oh yeah, can you explain how you can't preserve the environment according to ecology? I suppose I can answer that question really quickly. So ecosystems are never static. They're never, ever static. So it's literally impossible to preserve them. So ecosystems are always changing. Things are always shifting. A fire will come through and roll back the clock of succession, and then the ecosystem will regenerate. The species composition is always changing, since the climate is constantly changing. People like to say the climate's changing, but those changes are usually small and gradual. So ecosystems are gradually changing, and so like you can't preserve it. Like you can wall it off, but given that humans are a part of nature, we need to accept that we're a part of nature. And we just need to understand what that means in terms of the ways that we should interact with it. We should interact with it in a constructive way and instead of a destructive way. And what that really means is for us that we need to do is we need to understand ecology. We need to understand how ecosystems work and therefore how we can work with them and practice mutual aid with the communities of life that we are a part of. Yeah, second nature, third nature. Yes, definitely look into Bookchin. He really outlines a lot of this. I love Bookchin's work, but he's not the only one who has done this kind of like transformative, ecological thinking. So there's lots of wonderful folks out there in the realm of environmental thought with like more radical perspectives of how we can transform society and stuff like that. Yep. Anyways, if we want to cut it off now, Logan, that's perfectly fine. I hope you all enjoyed. I know that was long and extensive.
No, it was absolutely wonderful, and we definitely thank you for joining us here. And we hope that people enjoyed it, and we hope that people enjoy watching the videos afterwards. Sorry to all our viewers as far as being a little behind earlier. But hopefully we'll get caught up soon. And I guess we will transition right into our next panel, which is the Center for a Stateless Society panel. So
Yeah.
thank you so much, Andy.
Yeah, thank you. A quick question. Will I be able to access a recording of that too? Because I have to go get a COVID test now. So
Absolutely. Yeah, it's on your YouTube channel, and then the stream is on your YouTube channel, and then we can also send video as well. So thank you so much.
yeah. Of course, and thank you all. Love you guys. I hope this inspired you, because oftentimes it's like doom and gloom with the environment, but it's really not. We can do this. We can literally go out there and heal the land right now. It's amazing. There's so much to be optimistic about, in my opinion, despite all this. Thank you, everyone.
Absolutely. All right. Now we shall transition into the Center for a Stateless Society panel. How is everyone? Oh, hello. So what is, well, I guess let's start off with introductions. For those who have not, those just tuning in, I am Logan Marie Glitterbaum, she, her. I am a writer and fellow with the Center for a Stateless Society and an organizer with Crew Domain and the Green Market Agorist. And yeah. Who wants to go next?
Do you want to popcorn it?
All right, well, it's your turn now. You said something.
Oh, I said something. Oh, shoot.
Introduce yourself.
Okay. Hi, I'm Eric. I don't have a specific position in Center for Stateless Society, but I am affiliated, and I work especially around publishing, and I'm a self-described logistics gremlin for this podcast, The Enlightening. I work largely around cooperative food systems, but I'm about to transition into another job working around time banks. And I am an undergrad student pursuing a double major in anthropology and philosophy with specific interest in economic anthropology, anthropology of stateless societies, dialectical philosophy, and feminist philosophy. And I'm going to popcorn to Spooky.
Oh, hey there, everyone. Yep, I am Spooky. I am responsible for making sure that Tanky and Ancon Twitter constantly hates us. Yeah, I basically just write stuff sometimes. Similarly, no official position. Yeah, so yeah, that's what I do. I am an egoist, and if you don't like that, I don't care. I'm gonna pass it off to Nathan right now.
Hello, I'm Nathan. I previously was the Lysander Spooner Research Scholar in Abolitionist Studies at the Center for a Stateless Society, which basically meant I wrote a lot about prison abolition. I abandoned that position when I went to grad school. I'm currently working on a PhD in economics. Most of what I do in terms of my research relates to the political economy of various things that are supposed to be, in some sense, related to defense or security, both the state's militarized security apparatus, the warfare state, border militarization, and so on, as well as alternative ways that people can provide defense from the bottom up. So things like the ways in which social movements defend their communities, that sort of stuff. I also do some work on various forms of non-state governance, some of which are, forms I'm more sympathetic to than others, but a variety of ways in which people cooperate through means other than centralized state direction. So that's the broad overview of my interests. I haven't been as involved with C4SS lately as I was previously because I'm fairly focused on my graduate studies, but it's still a big part of how I got to where I am, and